So think of all those extra trips you take to the kitchen, you don't know why you're there. God knows why you're there and he's watching over you. Isn't that an assurance? I think it's a fairly universal experience, trying to get people into a car, plus all your stuff, to go somewhere. Can you remember those days? And you, over the years, you learn certain tactics to get them out the door. And usually in our house, it's telling them that you want to leave half an hour before you actually want to leave. And then you might actually get to leave at the time you actually want to leave. See, these are skills, and you're getting them all from free right here. And one of my jobs in the great adventure of going anywhere is to pack the car. Isn't that a skill? Isn't that an absolute skill? If my wife was to pack the car, all sorts of carnage. The dog would be on the roof and the kids would be tied to the back running along behind. But no, there's a special skill, and this ritual begins a good few hours, and sometimes even the night before you're going somewhere. Everything having its perfect space, so that when you squeeze them all in, they've got room to move their pinky. And that is how they have to stay for at least 8 hours on the way up. When we moved to Arran, we moved in such a way as that Tracy had to sit with a big tray of mugs on her lap all the way from Hertfordshire, all the way to Ayrshire. And she was warned, do not move, because that's my favourite mug. But we got there. The chaos of travel. And of course, these are travelling psalms, as we reminded ourselves last week. And as you set out, you're aware that you may face perils of the road. And aren't you all aware of it, as I say, at this time of the year, when it's dark? And when you're coming over Lamlash Hills, and there's a lovely person with lovely LED lights coming towards you, and you're absolutely blind, and you're just hoping for the best. You're praying, Lord, you're in the driving seat now. Because you can't see a thing, can you? You cannot see an absolute thing, and it's a good job you half know where the road is. But you recognise the perils of travel. And on a serious note, we've seen that in our news this week, haven't we? People whose lives have been lost through the perils of travelling. It's one of the things which has always been there. And even without cars and aeroplanes and helicopters and trains and buses and all those sorts of things, ferries, I should mention the ferries, for the early pilgrims moving up from where they were to Jerusalem, there was peril on the road. And so as the pilgrims start to move out on their journey, they're automatically thinking of the peril. Am I prepared? Are we suitably placed to be in the place where we can be as safe as we possibly can be? And so that's the thoughts that's in your mind. Not just have you packed your camel right, but have you considered your route and your journey? Are you planning your stops to be in the safest places at various points? And so the psalmist set out for this glorious experience of worship, but they're thinking of their safety. Now, I'm sure those of you who came across the string this morning were also thinking of that. How safe are we going to be? We know this experience universally. And this is why the second Psalm of Ascent makes total sense. You're starting out on the journey. You're on the road. And it begins by saying, I lift up my eyes to the mountains and say, where does my help come from? Now, I think for a number of years, I probably thought this sentence was, well, if you look at the mountains, how glorious are they? I mean, you look at Goatfell and its wee surrounding hills, you think, oh, how wonderful. And I always thought that, we look at the hills and think, wow, they're pretty good, but God is bigger. I don't know if anyone else has ever thought that's what this open sentence means, but it's really not. Because it was as these people would get through the mountain passes and the precarious roads and the hidden corners and crevices that their fear for their lives would start to mount. And so as they lift up their eyes to the hills, they might be seeing the grandeur, but they're automatically thinking, this is the scary bit of the journey. This is the scary bit of the journey. I think there's Lord of the Ring fans in the room, isn't there? When the fellowship start to go and they have to get through the other side of the mountains, they have to go under the mountain, that's where the real peril begins. And if you're not a Lord of the Ring fan, don't worry, we'll pray for you. And there's always time to catch up with that. But the mountains were a symbol of danger. Do you remember Jesus tells the parable of the Good Samaritan? And the poor pilgrim is making his way on the road to Jerusalem. And what happens to him there? He gets attacked by brigands and thieves, and they leave him half dead on the road. There's a danger on the journey. And where do you look in that danger? Well, of course, you look to the God who is bigger than the danger. You look to the one who is the creator of the mountains where the danger may lie. And so this, in the beginning of this pilgrimage, is an encouragement. In the face of fear, in the face of trial, in the face of danger, to look at the one who is the maker of heaven and earth, because that is where our help comes from. My help comes from the one who put these mountains in the place, for the one who knows, and from the one in whom I can place my trust. Now, there's no guarantee that as you go through the mountains, somebody won't come out and give you a smack about the head, is there? But even then, the confidence is that God is still the maker of heaven and earth, and in him we are ultimately secure. I mean, if you read this psalm naively, you would think that there was nothing that could ever happen to you, you know? He won't let your foot slip. I mean, how many people have slipped by your feet and fallen right in your face? Does that make the psalm not true? No, it's in the experiences of all this that we know that God is ultimately the one who holds us. And our ultimate security is in him, and it is for all eternity because of his covenant love. No matter what fear besets you right now, whether it seem like a molehill or whether it seem like the biggest mountain you've come across, God is bigger than it. Now that's a really simple thing to say. But actually, some of you have experiences right now where there's things ahead of you and you just don't know how it's going to go. You don't know what the results are going to be. You don't know what's going to happen. And it's those sorts of things that as you set out on your journey every day, you might find yourself looking at the mountains and saying, I don't know if I'm going to get round this one. I don't know. But it's in that moment we are encouraged to consider God as our helper, as the one to whom we can look. What is your biggest fear? What besets you now? Know that there is transformation that can come in looking to him. He is the one who knows the beginning from the end. So God is our helper. Verse 1 and 2 tells us that. Verse 3 and 4. The kind of assuring thing that God is our watcher as well. Sometimes the idea that God's watching you is used as a bit of a threat. God is watching you. Has somebody ever told you that? Maybe at Sunday school, you've been a bit of a rogue. God's watching you. I don't know if you've ever heard that. Maybe it's just the Sunday school I went to. I didn't go to Sunday school. Maybe that's why. But this whole idea that God is watching over us, in what way is he watching over us? I remember, especially, perhaps with my eldest child, when he would get sick, as a new dad, they let you home from hospital with these little things, no qualifications, no experience whatsoever. You're in for a couple of days, then they let you leave the hospital with it, and then you've got this little alien thing, and you have to take care of them, And you worry about it. You put them to bed, and when they're sick, when they're all covered in chicken pox and all these sorts of things, I remember those nights when you put the thing to bed and he's no wheel, and you sort of sit there. Yeah, he's still breathing. That's still breathing, still going. Yeah, and that experience of those watches through the night. And don't you all know that it doesn't change, does it? Even when they're big and ugly, it doesn't change. I just said that because my daughter's here this morning. Even when you're big and ugly, it doesn't change. That sense of watching it. If that's true for us who've had the experience of being parents or aunties or uncles and grandparents, how true is it of God, the one who watches over? The one who watches over through day and through night, like a shepherd watching over his flock. If you go through the Old Testament and into the New Testament, you'll see that one of the predominant ideas we get about God from the Old Testament and the New Testament is God's identification with the role of shepherd. He's many things. He's Father, He's Creator, He's Maker, He's Preserver, He's Governor, He's all those things. But this sense of shepherd, of looking out over the week, of looking to the horizon, to watch for the danger, to prompt in the Spirit the things that we must know to avoid the things which are traps for us. God is our watcher. And He's our watcher against the terrors of the day and the terrors of the night. So if you think of yourself going to Jerusalem, you have to think of the human terrors. But you're also facing natural terrors as well. The sun in the day can scorch your solar panels on your head, and you can get thirsty and you can get weary. And so you have to think of your places for rest. And then at night, there are dangers of the night if you're traveling. Did you know that the word lunatic comes from the word for the moon, lunar? You know, the sort of madness of the night is the fears and the terrors of the night. God's going to protect you from sunstroke during the day and from becoming a lunatic at night. I mean, He's got this canopy spread over you. And the invitation that we're invited in is not to go down the line of thinking that means we're automatically 100% insured, guaranteed that nothing is ever going to happen. But this fact that even in the heat of the day and in the severe cold and terror of the night, there is still a covenant God who watches over us. He is our safe place in every moment of our day. Now you'll notice something that happens here, and if you haven't noticed it, I'll tell you. In verse 1 and 2, we get this language, I lift up my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. Look at verse 3 and 4. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. He who watches over Israel will not slumber. You notice what happened there? We've gone in the first couple of verses to talk about my, and then it goes to talking about your. Okay? So there's two things that I want to bring out. First of all, we have this sort of pastoral responsibility to one another. You can imagine that as they sing this song on the way to Jerusalem, they've been celebrating the truth that God is my help. But perhaps you look over and wee Doreen is looking a bit sort of feared. And you say to her, He will not let your foot slip. And so there's that communal sense. We're not just my, me, but it's our and we and your. There's that communal sense. This was a journey together. You're gathering with the people of God. And so there's a responsibility, isn't there? To walk alongside each other on our pilgrimage towards the New Jerusalem and to say, sometimes, you're going to be okay. God has got this. He watches over you. In that meeting you're going to have, in that hospital appointment you're going to have, you're going to be safe in the hands of God in spite of the circumstance. And don't we need that? Don't we need to hear that from each other? There's also potentially another factor here. You'll often find this in the Psalms. You'll often find the psalmist talking to themselves. Have you ever talked to yourself? Do you have a good conversation with yourself? There's extra bonus being able to talk to the dog. I mean, my dog is an expert theologian. I mean, he knows bits of theology that you haven't even thought about, and he just sort of sits there and there's this sort of thing. I'm sure he's very interested. But in the Psalms, this idea of talking to yourself is magnified. It's perfectly biblical. It's the psalmist saying, "Awake, my soul! Come on, soul! Wake up and look to God! Come on, and you in there, you fearful one, trust in the Lord! Come on, you who don't know what's going to happen when Absalom catches up with you. Trust in Him. Look to Him. He is your strength. He is your protection." And so in the Psalms we find this self-talk, this recognizing the truths of the gospel and saying, come on now. Come on now. I can see the anxiety swirl in your head. I can see the fear. But come on, soul. Lift up your eyes beyond the hills and again look to God. In not my bag over there, my other bag, I've got a little pocket in the bag. It's full of pockets and full of junk. But in that bag, I have a number of little cards about that size. And I've got some that are even that size as well. And over the years, I have written things on those cards that Andrew Clark needs to hear. You know, when all my confidence, when all my courage, when all my faith, when all my trust drips out the bottom of my toes, I need to have that, something that I can just pick up in the moment and say, now remember when you wrote that and you really need to hear that? Well, you need to hear it again today, Andrew Clark. And I speak to myself in the Lord, things that he has said about me and for me and to me. And I'm reminded again that he counsels me with his word. And so if you were to talk to yourself today, friends, secured in the understanding of who God has called you to be, what would you need to say to yourself this morning? What would you need to say to yourself this morning? What courage do you need to find? What truth do you need to hear? What confidence do you need to stand in? What assurance do you need? Perhaps you'll hear it from the mouth of someone else to encourage you and bless you on your pilgrimage this morning. Or perhaps you'll need to say it to yourself. But the Lord is our watcher. He watches over, and we're invited to step in to all that he says. Finally, God is our eternal companion. Look at those last few verses. The Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and your going, both now and forevermore. In other words, we're dealing with a God who is more interested than just your small pilgrimage to Jerusalem to worship him. He's interested in the whole span of your life. We've sung recently that song, which I think has been kind of new to us. It's kind of new in general. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I'm able, I will sing of the goodness of God. All my life. And I think I've said before that if you go on YouTube, you can see videos of wee children, barely 3-4 years old, singing All My Life You Have Been Faithful. And there's a glorious video of people who are well into their 80s and 90s, sitting in a wee rock band conformation, and they're giving it loudly, All my life! It's not in tune, it's absolutely terrible, but all my life you have been faithful. They've got more years to account for, but still able to say, God, you have been there. Even beyond the span of our years. What is it they say? 70 years and 10? Any of you on overtime? But not just the span of our lives, but into all eternity, we are secured. And some of you weren't even admitting that, but it is true. For all eternity, he will be our watcher, and he will be the one who will preserve us. He will be our eternal companion, just as he is just now. We're told in Revelation that this new Jerusalem that we're making our pilgrimage towards is the place where God will dwell with his people, and we will dwell with him. Can you even begin to imagine that? We get glimpses in the here and now where we can sense the presence of God. But can you imagine the perfection of that new day, of that new creation, of that new heavens and earth, where we will be with God eternally? When we're in our loneliest, most desolate place, the truth of the eternal companionship of God is what we can draw down from heaven as a deposit, by the Spirit as a guarantee of that which is to come. If you go and look at the testimonies of the persecuted church who have found themselves in dark prison cells, separated and alone for days and months and years, the ones that can see it through are the ones who have known that even in the darkest hole, God has been there. We see Paul and Silas in prison for preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ, and they begin to sing, and God breaks in. And they know that he is the eternal companion. Friends, as we look at the life of Jesus, before he ascends to heaven, he says, go into the world and do this and do that and do the next thing. And he closes that off by saying, and I will be with you always, even until the very end of this age, and of course, beyond. And so, friends, as we begin to gather around the table now this morning, we are fed as pilgrims. We are fed with the presence of God, who is our constant companion. A reminder that we proclaim the Lord's death until he comes, but that we will rejoice with him in the great feast as we go up to the New Jerusalem to join with him forever. The anticipation of the great feast. May that be an assurance to our hearts this morning as we are pilgrims on the road.